You, ladies and gentlemen, interfered with the United States of America 2020 presidential election, knowingly and willingly. That's the bad news. It's going to get worse because this is the investigation part. Later comes the arrest part.
All right, what up, Anna? Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Sorry, we're kind of like texting over here, going back and forth, but it's an honor to have you on the show. So let me have you introduce yourself, tell everybody about you, and we're going to dive into this interview.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. My name's Anna Perez. I've been a journalist for a number of years now. Right now I work for LFATV. Formerly, I worked at Real America's Voice. I had a show there called Common Sense. I know a lot of people keep asking me where I went. I'm now at LFATV, which is Jeremy Harrell's new network, and I host a show called Wrongthink with Anna Perez. Before Real America's Voice, I was at Blaze TV, where I produced a few shows there. I produced for Andrew Wilkow. I produced for Gavin McInnes, for John Miller, just to name a few. And then before that, I was working on The Hill, actually. So I have a pretty diverse background there. But yes, now I host a show called Wrongthink, and it airs at 3 p.m. right here on Rumble. Well, we're on YouTube now, so.
That's crazy. It was when we first started talking, I'm like, I was trying to do research into you and I couldn't find you. It was like they scrubbed you from the internet. So she was telling me a little bit about this story. But let's start at the very beginning because I want to learn about your background. What age were you when you first got into this industry?
So I went to school for journalism. So I was one of those people that actually believed you needed a degree for this because I was brainwashed to think that. But I knew before I went to college that I wanted to do journalism. I was always a huge history buff. And one of the eras that I was obsessed with was, and still am to this day, is the Gilded Age. And I was just obsessed with this idea of the muckrakers that existed back then and all of the real journalism that they did to expose the corrupt government. Now, at this time, I wouldn't exactly call myself a out-of-the-box thinker like I am today, a contrarian, as I like to say about myself now. I would just say I was more of like a run-of-the-mill Republican, like, well, we should still have some trust in our government. So I wasn't even really aware of what I was going to be reporting on just yet. I thought I was just going to be a talking head on Fox News. That was my dream. And then I went to school and I realized how, terrible the industry really is, because even in college, they would have us cover very specific things. Now, I went to college at American University in DC, so very liberal university, very liberal school, just area in general, I should say. And it just became very clear to me how bad the bias was. Now, I always knew there was one. I was never like this major liberal, this flaming liberal, but I would say I was definitely like, average, almost Adam Kinzinger Republican, which I'm not proud of. Okay. I've obviously, if anyone's ever watched my content, I've come a long way since then, but yeah, so I think everybody to some degree had some trust in the government, as even if you were a conservative at that point. But of course I went to school right around the time that Trump was running. That was 2015. So I entered the industry at a very interesting time. And of course I became a huge fan of Trump. I started researching for the first time. But halfway through college, I interned at a place called CRTV, which ultimately merged with Blaze. And at the same time, I was still in college. I was a PA. I was working as a PA at CRTV at the time. And I was also in school. So I remember contrasting the things I was learning in college versus the things that I had to research for CRTV. Now, no one had ever told me that there was a contrarian perspective to some of the things that I was researching. I actually believed that there might have been some racism to wanting the wall, right? But I started researching and I started, realizing how bad the immigration problem is, right? How bad basically every problem is, all the lies we're told about racism. Now, it's funny because I'm a Hispanic woman, and I think at that time the attacks on Trump about racism were so bad that it was hard for me to not see through the lies, because I am a Hispanic woman. I've only grown up in white communities. I've only lived in white communities my whole life, okay? And never once in my life have I ever experienced racism. If anybody is going to experience racism, it would be somebody who is not white, who has always grown up in a white community. Racism does not exist. It's not a thing. And I know that's going to piss people off, even conservatives, when I say that, but it's not. So that was also kind of what woke me up to the problem, because I realized that, wait a second, all you have to do is sit here and think for 2 seconds, and you could see through all the lies that the media tells you, because I think the problem is a lot of people don't actually actively think about what they're being told. They just parrot it. But if you actually think to yourself, wait, that can't be true. And I also worked for a number of people that, I don't think I realized until later, but they were some of the most brilliant people in the industry, like John Miller, Gavin McInnes, Andrew Wilkow, just incredibly, intelligent people who really did do their research and were really muckrakers in their field at the time. Now I feel like they set a standard where we're all kind of saying that's kind of stuff. But at the time it was groundbreaking. Like you couldn't say that Nazis weren't a thing. How dare you say that there's no such thing as racism? How dare you, And I just feel like, I didn't realize till I left those people, till I stopped working for them, when I went to Real America's Voice, when I started going off in a different direction, that I realized wow, I was so lucky to have worked around these really intelligent people. And that's also where I learned how to ask good questions, how to write even. I credit John Miller for my writing skills, because one of the things I'm pretty good at is writing. I started as a producer. I wasn't always on air. In fact, that wasn't even really my goal. I wanted to just write for people. And that became my forte. I was very good on a TV writer. So, and then one day I just I filled in for David Brody at Real America's Voice. And that is kind of what launched my on-air career. And then I started saying things that were a little bit outside of the box, even for conservatives. And now here I am at the most free speech network.
What year was that when you started at Real America's Voice?
It was late 2020. It was November of 2020. Yeah.
Okay. And then so now we're getting to Real America's Voice. So tell us a little bit about working there.
Yeah, so I started there as a producer. I remember when I walked into the interview, I knew it was an emerging network. And I thought to myself, this is a great opportunity for me to really get my foot in the door, as, I did do some reporting at Blaze TV. So it wasn't like I was completely new to on-air stuff, but I really wanted an opportunity where I could potentially have a show and not just have a segment, because a lot of times that's what they tell young journalists to sort of get them to, work their way to the top, and nothing ever really comes of it. But Real America's Voice was an emerging network. I went there at the time, especially they had just started out. It was not at all what it is now even. So I interviewed there, and the guy said who was interviewing me, he's actually a great friend of mine now. He said, that I watched some of your stuff. Eventually I'd like to see you on air. And I was like, great, this is an opportunity for me. Because I think at that point I've never been the kind of person who's oh, I want to be a talking head. It's just that I wanted to get credit for my writing for the first time ever. In the past, I had written for a lot of middle-aged people that were, talented, but I was still doing the majority of the work. I still say to this day, the hardest workers in this industry are the producers. And there are podcast hosts like yourself and the hosts at LFATV. We all do our own research and a lot of our own work. So this is a new age of media. But Real America's Voice, those other outlets, they're still operating on sort of more of the dinosaur media model. So you do have your producer, your talking head, where they just repeat what you're saying, and the majority of the work is done by a group of people, staff. So anyways, I wrote for a bunch of hosts there, and that was good experience, I guess. But at that point, I had already had a few years of journalism under my belt, and yeah, it was interesting because they brought me on air. First of all, they were reluctant to. They didn't want to put me on air. John Solomon didn't want me on air. I remember because David Brody at the time was working with John Solomon, and John Solomon was very reluctant to put me on air because I was, he's from the dinosaur media age, and I guess I was too young. And he even made a comment, I remember, like, oh, I know why you want her on air, because she's attractive, basically. And David Brody was like, no, I want her on air because she's a good writer and she can do this. And I don't see why she can't fill in for me. Mm-hmm. It was weird. And this is all from David Brody, him telling me this. And this happened a long time ago. And I want to say 6 months into me working there. And so then what happened is I wasn't allowed to fill in for him. And then like a month later, he was on vacation and he really, really fought for me. Brody's one of my best friends. He really, really fought for me in this industry. And I was able to fill in. And so that happened. And then after that, David also helped me push for me getting a show, because I wound up filling in. The audience really liked my take on things. Now, what they didn't know was that I had written for a number of the people at the network, so they were familiar with my work already. But I was finally like in charge of my own content. I was able to host my own show when I was filling in for him. And then eventually just led to me getting my own weekly show called Common Sense. And, I kept pushing, the boundaries of what was acceptable conservative speech, because every conservative likes to pretend that they're free speech, but the reality is most of them are not. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with my work at RAV, but they can probably imagine what I'm talking about here. When it came to COVID related issues, when it came to, election related issues, a lot of different things. And, I understand YouTube's weird about that, so I won't get into details, but,
thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, so, eventually I think it came down to a point where there was a lot of dispute over what direction the company wanted to go in, whether they wanted to acquiesce to advertisers or be free speech. And, I went my own way. I quit myself because I knew what was expected of me had I stayed. And they kind of forced me out anyway, because they were like, you can't work at LFA and RAV, even though I was an independent contractor. That's the weird part. I never signed a contract at all there. So, I wound up leaving, and I'm really happy I left. I'm much happier mentally and emotionally, I would say, here at LFA. It's 100% free speech. Nobody tells me what I can and cannot say or put on air. And nobody has ever made me feel like I'm crazy or a conspiracist for wanting to explore certain topics. So I've ended up, it's an interesting time for me, because I never would have thought 3 years ago or 2 years ago that I would be this person on air, talking about 9/11 or talking about Operation Mockingbird or January 6th and, questioning the police or anything like that. It's just, I know, sorry, that was maybe a long-winded answer, but it was a lot. Great. I learned a lot working there, and I learned a lot about the importance of free speech. And I also learned a lot about the conservative media industry and how they truly operate, because I had a very nice experience, I would say, at Sierra TV/Blaze TV. It was just a much different experience. And even there, I could see how the landscape, they were trying to clamp down on certain people, like Gavin McInnes left, John Miller left. And it just wasn't the same once the certain people that I liked left. And, I can't speak on that because I don't know exactly what the stories are. But other than that, like, it was still a relatively, they were free speech to my knowledge. And, I enjoyed working there. It was a very pleasant experience. Can't say the same for RAV. And that's just the reality. I'm just speaking the truth. And it's nothing. I'm not trying to bash anyone, but I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie about my experience. And I'm not going to lie to my audience about, the places where they're consuming their news from. So,
I think everybody appreciates that. So what year was it when you left REV? That was recently?
Yeah. So I left in September of 2022.
September of 2022. And when did you start at LFA? Right away?
I started a few weeks later in October. Yeah.
Okay. So you've only been at LFA for like 5 months now total?
Yeah. Not a very long time at all. And it's funny because everyone keeps they're like, what happened to Anna? And to your point, a lot of my content was like scrubbed from the internet. I don't know. Okay. I don't know exactly what went on, but I mean, I feel like something happened ever since one of the segments that kind of went viral that kind of put me on the, put me out there, I would say, was the one where I covered the Mar-a-Lago raid. And I was connecting the dots between Jeffrey Epstein, his lawyer, and Mar-a-Lago, and the fact that they were worried that information was going to come out if Trump were to run again in 2024 and win. And I did this whole segment on that. It's on my Rumble channel if you guys want to check it out, Anna Perez DC. because a lot of people ask me for the link, but it's hard to find because, to your point, it's like scrubbed from the internet. A lot of my information, the segments I've done, like, it's like, I don't know what happened, but ever since that segment came out and ever since I left, just like, you can't, if you Google me or anything, and not that I was ever like some big name, like I'm not saying that, but it's almost like it's easier to get people who are sort of in the middle there to just like scrub them. It's like, we're going to get rid of her early on because she's already too much of a threat. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it really, I was blown away because I've heard your name so many times and I've seen you on so many different networks. And then when I went to find, like, I was looking for a cover photo of you. And like the best one I could find was that LFA one. And normally people like yourself, there's everywhere. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not on LinkedIn, so I couldn't get on your LinkedIn either, but it's wild. So tell us a little bit about what it was like working at like these networks. So when people go into work, like a reporter, like say David Brody, somebody's writing his scripts. And is that on like teleprompters? Like you were writing the content for these guys, it goes on a teleprompter and they sit there and they just do their news thing? Is that how all these networks are working?
Yeah, so I can't speak for everyone, obviously, because everyone has their own sort of style of doing things, especially if you've been in the industry for a while, you have your own, and you're a bigger name, you have more control over your staff, over the operation there. Like somebody like Tucker Carlson, for example, I've actually heard he writes mostly his own stuff. I've heard multiple things. I've heard some people, like he has things written for him, he writes his own stuff. But ultimately, I would say people who are operating on like the sort of dinosaur news dynamic, they have staff. They have like at least 2 writers that are called producers. People don't always know what the role of a producer is. Traditionally, a producer isn't the one operating all of the technical stuff. They're the ones who are in charge of curating the content, stacking the show, which means putting together the stories in the right order, booking guests. You can be a booking producer. That's a specific job too at some networks, depending on the budget of the network. When I was at Real America's Voice as the producer, I was doing everything. And for the most part, I was the only producer. I did work on one show prior to David Brody's where I had an assistant producer, but it wasn't even a complicated show. It was like a run-of-the-mill news show. That was the first show I worked on there, and it was pretty boring because I didn't really get to say anything I wanted to. And so when I started working with David Brody, he gave me a lot of creative freedom, partly because he didn't really have an option because he didn't really have much of a staff. But he actually pulled a lot. He was the hardest working host I've ever worked with as a producer because he actually did a lot of his own work. He booked guests, he helped me put me in contact with them, and we worked really well. It was definitely teamwork because I wound up co-hosting with him too. So it was definitely more 50-50, I would say. But yeah, traditionally that's not very common. Traditionally, producers don't really get respected that well, especially if they're young. And you know, they don't really get many opportunities and they're just told do this, this, and this. And the hosts oftentimes will just show up for an hour and read a teleprompter, read a script that they may have not read before. So that's why I always say, like, even people like Joy Reid and like Don Lemon, they're even more stupid than you think because they probably didn't even write what was in front of them. They probably have no idea until they walk in 10 minutes before what they're reading. So all these made up narratives, they're not even smart enough to come up with that by themselves. Like that was probably made up by some 19-year-old intern that you've never heard of before. So that's just the reality. That said, there are a lot of really talented hosts that like to pull their weight. So I'm not speaking for them. I'm just saying, actually, I would say the lesser known people tend to be more diva-like than the better known people. Like everybody I work with that's a really big name is actually really intelligent and very humble and works very hard. It's the people who are not very well known that tend to be the most difficult to work with. And they walk in and they think they can just do whatever they want and everybody else has to suffer the consequences. But like, Gavin McInnes, a genius, comedic genius, also worked really hard. Andrew Wilco worked hard. John did. Who else? Brody worked really hard. A lot of really, really talented journalists that work hard. Usually the bigger names are the ones that are easier to work with.
So tell us a little bit about your show now. So when you're getting ready to do a show on LFA, like walk me through your setup process. Like if you started the day, you had nothing planned for the night, how are you going to get that content? Where are you doing your research at? Are you got papers in front of you? Do you have screens in front of you? Do you have somebody producing? I seen like we're like playing clips of like J6 and like it would come across the screen. Do you got like a studio set up? Walk us through it.
Yeah, so you'd be surprised at what I can accomplish on my own because I literally do everything myself. I don't even have a real studio. This is my apartment where I film my show. And it's a very small apartment. You'd be shocked if you saw the setup. I have friends who have seen it and they're like, whoa, like I had no idea. I thought you filmed in like a different studio, but if you really want to do something, you can make it happen. And I think I definitely learned that through this process, because this was very new for me. I've never been a podcaster ever. I never saw my career going in this direction. I always thought I was going to be like an anchor, a night, like a fancy looking anchor at a desk, reading a teleprompter. But no, this was a huge adjustment. And if you look back at my first couple of shows, you'll see, like, despite the fact that it's so crazy, because you can be in the industry for as many years as you want, but podcasting is just a different beast than anchoring, because there's no script, there's nothing. The best you can do is do a lot of research, which is helpful. But yeah, so I do my research on my own. It takes me, I would say I'm very quick. Depending on the topic, it can take me anywhere from 3, if it's a deeper dive, it might take longer, 3 to 4 hours, sometimes 2, if it's like a less deeper dive. But I always try to do more of a deeper show. Like, a lot of podcasts cover multiple news stories in one show, which is really helpful if you want to get all your news in one place. Mine is more of like a contrarian,
topic-centric.
Yeah, very issue-based show. So I do talk a lot about history, or I relate issues to what we're going through now to history. Like, I did a whole show on Operation Mockingbird, and I talked about how we're living under Operation Mockingbird 2.0, things like that, the food pyramid, how we've been lied to about nutrition from the government. So not even necessarily political things. But yeah, so right now it's just a one-man band. It was a really hard adjustment, I will say. And also multitasking. I'm what they call switching in the industry, which is what a director would normally do in like a traditional media setting. I'm switching all my own assets, which means when you see a clip go up, I'm clicking on that. Or when you see a full screen, which is like a quote pop up, I'm also doing that. I also edit everything beforehand. So other than my show intro and my lower thirds, any assets you see, I put them together myself. And that's also something I never had to do in the past. But, I think this is the aspect of the industry that I think is gaining popularity. And I think if anybody plans to survive in media, you have to learn how to do all of those things. And you have to be hungry enough to want to do that, because especially if you're pushing the boundaries, you're going to get deplatformed at some point. And it's just a matter of time. These are businesses, you have to understand, at the end of the day. And the only thing you can really rely on is yourself. And, joining, right now, LFATV is an independent based network. So all of us, we are independent contractors. As you know, we kind of do everything ourselves. I wouldn't call us like a traditional media network at all in that sense. So the business model is such that it allows us to do whatever it is that we want. So I think that's going to be the future of media. And what that means is yes, you get more freedom, but it's also, you have more of a responsibility to make the show good, to make the show happen,
Mm-hmm. And now, with all of your years in media, do you have connections? Are you bringing on a lot of special guests? Like, walk me through, like, how do you plan out? Do you plan out your week a week in advance? I'm very curious because I'm so new to this, and it's so interesting learning from you guys are, I consider, experts in the field. So
yeah, well, I actually, what's funny is people actually don't always respond well to guests unless it's a really big guest. Like if you have Donald Trump on, or Roger Stone, or you have somebody who's going to break news, typically guests don't do that well in podcasting. And I think it's because when people watch a podcast, they want to see their favorite media personalities talk. They don't necessarily want a news show. And I think with news shows, guests are more of a priority, at least in my experience, because when I was at Real America's Voice, like 50 to 60% of my episodes were guests. And, that's different when you're a journalist. Like that was a journalistic setting. While I still consider myself a journalist, I am definitely more veering into the media personality category, which I'm very clear about with people. You're not going to get like some unbiased news show. Like, no, this is an editorial show. You're going to watch me give you my opinion, my analysis. I certainly am a very well-researched journalist. Like I make sure I deeply research these things. And also these are things that I have prior knowledge of, considering, I'm very passionate about history and a lot of other issues, nutrition, things like that. But yeah, so I find that guests actually sometimes can take away from a show. And that's not just my opinion. Like numerically, you watch the viewership drop when you have a guest on for too long. It's very interesting because it's crazy for me to think that, because here I am, 25-year-old Anna Perez. I'm like, why would anybody want to hear what I have to say over what, some other like whistleblower has to say? You know what I mean? Like, it's a wild concept to me, but it's just a different beast. When you're a podcaster, people want to hear the podcaster usually, not somebody else. And I don't know, that's been a weird adjustment for me. So I do have guests on. In fact, I just recorded a really interesting interview with an FBI whistleblower that I think will actually do well tomorrow, because people do like certain topics, especially if you package it the right way. Like, I think one of the keys that people miss is packaging it well. And that is something I actually learned from Blaze TV. They were very particular about that. They would have me rewrite titles, rewrite descriptions all the time when I was a PA there. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, I can't believe I have to do this. Well, it's a skill that I now have. I'm very good at packaging an episode and, enticing the viewer to come in. And it's not like clickbaity. It's just that you have to write it in a way that you're giving people all the information they need to want to watch it without being too verbose. Yeah. That's really important to draw people in. And sometimes with guests, it's just not worth mentioning the guest in the title. Sometimes it is. Sometimes, like if you have Donald Trump, obviously put it in the title. No doubt. But a lot of it's packaging. Guests aren't necessarily the best thing to have on the show, surprisingly. And I think it's all about how well researched the show is, because people do want to hear what you have to say, your analysis of the topic.
And so what FBI whistleblower are you bringing on tomorrow? Can you not tell? Is it Kyle Seraphin?
Yes, it is. It is.
Oh, he's my man. He's my dude. I love Kyle.
Yeah.
I was really just texting him right before you got on.
He's amazing. I didn't really know that much. I mean, I did research before I interviewed him, but prior to that, I didn't really know that much. Oh my goodness. He is a treasure trove of historical information. Just a really smart guy. So I think the audience is actually going to like that one. But a lot of people will have on guests to fill time, or they'll have a no-name reporter, not to say that they're not great or that they have great information to share. It's just not something that the audience will really be interested in. It really has to be a very specific type of guest or a big name. Other than that, or like a really big name, either that, they're not going to want to tune in. It's weird. It's super weird.
So when you're doing your show, so like you did an interview with Kyle, you pre-recorded it, and then you've produced it into a segment. So you're going to go doing your live stream, and then you're going to cut to the interview? Is that how you produce tomorrow's show?
Yeah. So also that's actually a good question. One of the downsides to not having a producer and just being your own producer is that it's harder to do live interviews, because if anything goes wrong, you don't have somebody to mitigate the situation or do whatever might need to be done. So I get kind of nervous about bringing guests on live myself. So I always pre-record my interviews, which is partly why I don't always have guests on too, because it's just a different vibe. It doesn't feel as and maybe this is just in my head, but it just doesn't feel as professional as like a normal studio setting. So I feel weird asking certain guests to come on, come on my little podcast, I mean, I know that's not necessarily how I should see it, but I think also Gen Z and millennials have a different perspective of this than older people in the industry, or just older people in politics. Like a politician who's a boomer might think oh, why am I going on this stupid podcast or whatever? Whereas a Gen Z, if you had Andrew Tate on, that would be fine with him. That's what he's used to. So it also depends on the guest, but typically, it's I think it's an adjustment too. I'm just not fully used to interviewing people in on Riverside on my podcast, rather than being okay, come on live, let's do this show in this fancy setting. The bells and whistles, I think, matter more to boomers though than it does to Gen Z.
I agree 100%. It's really hard, when you get dead air or there's any issues, especially when you're live, it's so hard to manage all that. I was very curious. I can only imagine trying to bring in, if we wanted to bring in somebody to do a hit right now, so we were co-hosting, even producing that by yourself, it's so you have to get the link to them, you have to get them in, you have to make sure their audio is right on. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into bringing somebody on. So I was curious if you did that live. I was very interested.
Yeah, and booking guests, which nobody talks about. That actually is a job in and of itself. If I would not have a guest on every single day simply because it's too much work and I can't sit there coordinating. And as much as I find PR people very helpful in that way, they want to book in advance. They want to ask all these other follow-ups. And I'm literally doing this myself.
Mm-hmm. They do. And even just having a conversation, trying to get somebody on your time, that's an hour, if not 2 hours of just going back and forth. All right, where are you going to send the links? And you have to try to message them 15 minutes before the show. And if you're trying to do multiple shows in a day, people are texting you because they're oh, are we still on for today? Are we still on for today? And you're oh shit, I didn't even respond to them, and I got to have them on the show in 15 minutes. It's very impressive. So how are you been going about promoting your other channels? I seen you got 3,000 or 4,000 on IG now, maybe 5. How many you got on IG?
Oh, I don't have a lot. So actually my Instagram was banned in October.
Ask you.
So I used to be Anna Perez DC on Instagram. That was banned at a weird time too, right when I was leaving RIV. That's why I'm saying something weird went on. I was like scrubbed from the internet. My Instagram was banned. Like something, I don't know. I'm convinced the deep state like was coming after me pretty hard after that segment I did about Epstein and Mar-a-Lago. I don't know, something weird, because yeah, at that time I was scrubbed from. It's almost like they didn't want me in the industry at all. It's crazy. But no, so I got my Instagram. I got a new Instagram. It's Wrongthink Anna _, not the handle of choice, but it was what was available. And it's crazy because I had to jump through so many hoops to actually make it. I couldn't make it. I mean, of course they track your IP address. So, but I used so many people's phones and laptops, still didn't work. It's like it was so weird. They knew who I was. I wound up actually doing it through David Brody. We met up for coffee right around that time, and he was like, here, I'll just make it for you. It was weird. It wasn't until he actually physically was the one doing it that it worked. So very strange. But anyway, he helped me with that. So I did make a new Instagram. I hope Instagram's not watching this, because then they're going to ban me. Well, whatever. If they do, it'll just make me cooler. 2 times banned on Instagram. But yeah, so, but no, I only have like 1,100 followers right now, which is also weird. But even when I had an Instagram before, I still felt like my following was not that big, considering the fact that I was on like a huge platform doing a weekly show plus co-hosting a daily show. Like, I don't know. I don't trust Instagram. I think they really suppress followers, especially now. Like a lot of the people that I see have big followings now have been in the, like I'm saying, like 100,000 and more have been doing this for a long time. So it's like, you know, that they existed long before, like current times, which I think is the worst time to be on Instagram.
Yeah, the Instagram apocalypse was was their biggest downfall. It was like, I don't know, like 2019, 2018, 2019, when they, like any pretty girl could go out and get hundreds of thousands of followers. We took one of my ex's accounts from 10,000 to 650,000 in less than a year. And then they got really strict on what you could post. And it was just really weird how things transitioned from, like, it was like any pretty girl from like 2015, I would say, to 2018 could explode. Like if she was posting bikini pictures and doing photo shoots with decent photographers, like she could really accelerate and blow up on Instagram. And then they just like, it was like they attacked any girl that was pretty and showed any amount of skin. So like once 2019, 2020, and then I don't know if that was like the aftermath of Trump really trying to push us more towards like a God Christian, like let's crack down on what like all this OnlyFans stuff and all this Patreon stuff. And then now here we are with the transgender stuff, and it just blows my mind that like social media seemed like it was getting better there for a minute, and then it just fell off a cliff. Like you can't talk about God in school, but we're having drag queen parties in school. Like what point was that stuff became okay? And not just okay, it like I was telling, I forgot who I was talking to earlier, but I was like, I could rent a van and go live down by a river and eat bugs and probably have a YouTube channel that could get to 1 million subscribers in 6 months if I was doing completely full woke. But if I were to talk about God, Trump, and guns, I would have a trouble breaking 1,000 subscribers in a month or in a year, you know? And
no, it's absolutely true. Like it's the weirdest thing. Like, and I would argue that now it's like kind of the opposite. Like if I were to like post a bunch of pictures of me in a bikini, I probably would have hundreds of thousands of followers. I don't do that because I'm Christian. Right. And it's just, I think it's just like an uncomfortable thing to do. Like, it's just like, it tells the world I'm vain. And that's just like a weird, I don't know. I just never, even like selfies, like all the time, like on your actual feed, I get it on your stories, whatever, but on your feed, it's just weird. But not that I have a problem. People do it fine, I guess, if you want. Although I will say the bikini stuff, you should probably cut it out. All the world sees is that you're a slut when you do that. So don't do that to fellow young women out there. But anyways, yeah, I find that it's like, I just find now that the attack is on conservatives. Anybody who says anything that is remotely outside of what they want you to say. But it's interesting that you say that about 2015 through 2018, you said. I didn't know that. I mean, I was never like this super avid Instagram user anyway. So I wouldn't have really, but it is interesting because I feel like I was getting more followers like at a faster rate back then than I was when I actually became like a media person, like someone who was regularly on TV. I don't know. Instagram's weird. I just feel like right now they're definitely coming after people harder more than ever.
Do you follow Gary Vee? Gary Vaynerchuk. Do you know who Gary V is? He's that motivational
No, I
speaker
don't know who
who
that
always
is.
talks about social media. He was doing all the NFT stuff. He's an older guy. He's really famous social media guy, Gary V. But he's the one who was talking about like how TikTok was going to blow up and Instagram. But in 2018, it was like that stretch from 2015 to 2018 that everybody, like I said, any girl with a bikini, anybody that posted somewhat good content consistently on Instagram, photographers, and they had all these what are called like reshare groups. So like if you're a pretty girl and you tagged like bikini babes, right? And then that page, they call them feature pages. So you'd have this network of like 50 or 100 pages that all have hundreds of thousands of followers. And if you would tag them, they would feature you, and they call them feature pages. So if you understood how to tag the right people, you could get this network. But where I was going with that is Instagram realized that Gary V was out there promoting and saying like, if you're running a business, as a business owner, your money is best spent finding like the elite soccer mom in your neighborhood and giving her your product, having her post, tell her friends about it, like giving products to influencers and paying influencers to promote your product and wear your product, because you pay them one time and then chances are if they like your product and it's a good fit, they're going to wear it around, and every time they take a picture and they're wearing your shirt or your clothing. This is really like brand specific stuff. But where I was going with that is like my girlfriend was making so much money from Instagram and all these brands were paying her. And so instead of running Instagram ads, these brands were going and finding influencers and paying influencers to promote their products on the Instagram platform. So because people were blowing up so fast, Instagram's like, shit, we're losing out on ad revenue. Because we just made 20 girls famous last week that were previously not famous, and now all these brands are wanting to spend more money with these influencers because it's cheaper, and they're getting like if you're selling bikinis to younger girls 18 to 30, like you have a really target demographic. So obviously you want to pay these girls or give these girls your bikinis to wear and take pictures in and post them on there. She was sponsored by like Bang Energy and several different energy drinks, and they would just pay her just to like she would just sip a Bang and like record herself and then turn it into a little video and post it, and she'd get like $500 a month for one post, which was really, in my opinion, a pretty good deal for posting one time, getting $500. But then it was like this, they call it the Instagram apocalypse, and they changed their algorithm. So before it was an algorithm based off of, I don't really remember what the old algorithm is, but now it's your subscriber count divided by likes, follows, and shares and retweets or whatever you call them on Instagram. And they divide that number. So if you post today at Monday at like say 5 p.m., the Instagram algorithm compares the closest post at a similar time frame with like the same demographics. And then in the first like 10 seconds or 30 seconds, when they first push that post out to however many followers or subscribers you have, it's gauging your engagement rating. So if your engagement rating this post outperforms your next post, then it starts to push it out to more of your subscribers. And if those statistics start going bonkers, say you get like 125% watch time, meaning like everybody watched the same reel twice, right? If you hit like a certain threshold, because it's based off of your subscribers versus like your follower count, right? So if The Rock has 1 million subscribers, it's percentage based. So if your video starts to explode, that's how you get put on search and suggested or on their featured page. And that's how the algorithm works. Before, it would almost like blast it out to all of your subscribers. And now it just kind of like blasted out to the ones that you actually engage with the most. So like the people that are blowing up on Instagram also engage, they're trend jacking, and they understand how the algorithm works. But now it's literally so hard. And then to mix that in, you are a conservative, you're probably getting some type of shadow ban that you don't even know about. And no matter how good you are at the algorithm, no matter what you do, unless you have other ways to drive traffic to that platform, I think you get kind of silent. I actually know you get silenced. No questions asked.
Yeah. And the thing that the part of me that's like principled about all of this, I don't want to have to work around an algorithm. If you don't want me on your platform, I don't want to be there. And so I'll be there until you take me off, but I'm not going to play your little games. You know what I mean? So I understand why people work around it, especially if it's not too much of a nuisance to do that. If it's not, you don't have to go too much out of your way, like not mentioning certain topics or like, talking about specific things that, aren't necessarily the point of the show anyway. Like in our case, like when you were telling me about the things not to say on the show, but like, it wouldn't take away from my message based off the topic we're discussing anyways. Okay, no big deal. But like, when I have to go out of my way to not say certain things, to not type certain things, to not like, if I have to play all these games, it's like, I'm done with you, Instagram. I'm done with you, whatever social media platform, like just ban me. I'll be here until you ban me. It's not like I'm going to take myself off. And that was kind of my perspective with, in the past with Instagram. It's why I was banned. I know I was breaking rules, and they would tell me I was violating their policy, which was a retarded policy, as we all know anyway. So you would say anything that was remotely against the grain, and you would get a warning or whatever. And I was actually targeted more then, because I'll say some of the same stuff now, but they're not really looking at me anymore. Why? Because I have a smaller following. I have a fraction of what I had before. Not that I was ever this huge name again, but still. Yeah, I think it's like at a certain point, it's like, when do we as conservatives say, you know what, I'm principled enough to just not care. If you want to ban me, fine, but it just proves my point all along.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy to think that like nowadays, like I got a strike last week for telling the truth. Like nothing I said in my video was a lie or misleading or misinformation, and I got a strike for lying and misinformation. So it just seems crazy to me that our politicians aren't doing more. Does that make sense? Like, why aren't our politicians standing up for us? And it almost makes you think that our politicians really don't care about us at all. Like, they don't care about this fight for free speech. I think it's just all a big game. The more you look at it, and the more you're like, okay, we just watched Senate hearings with Twitter and the Twitter files, and people like Vijaya Gotti and Yoel Roth just getting grilled by Congress. And then 2 weeks later, I'm getting strikes for literally the exact same thing. It's almost like these social media platforms are literally just laughing at Congress. Like, yeah, you guys aren't going to do anything to us. Like, we're never going to be held accountable. We're so far above the law and your Constitution. The laws do not apply to us. And if you think you're going to try to enforce them, don't worry. We're just going to pay off and bribe and do whatever we have to not get in any trouble.
Congress is a joke. They don't actually care. They're not. It's a dog and pony show. They want to act like they're doing something. It's why, they go on C-SPAN and they have these like speeches about how they're going to do something, how the border's a disaster, how big tech is a disaster. It's like, yeah, I know. I can see it with my own two eyes. Can you do something about it? They're doing the same thing with January 6th protesters. They're taking a stand for optics purposes, and they're leaving them literally in prison, like not doing anything about it. Fine, visit the prison as many times as you want. But until you do something, I don't actually believe that you give a crap about these people. And I censored myself there.
Let me stop you right there really quick. I want you to give a big shout out to yourself. Tell everybody where they can follow you. And then we're going to drive this party over to Rumble so we can actually talk some truth and have a good time. We're going to talk a lot about these J6 political prisoners that are being held against their will and being held hostage by our corrupt government. So we got the Rumble link pinned at the very top of the channel. Down in the description of this video is Anna's Twitter. It is her LinkedIn, or not her LinkedIn, but all of Anna's stuff is down in the description. So if you guys would please swing over there, show her some love, and tell everybody what platforms you're on. Do your usernames one more time.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. So I'm at Anna Perez DC on Twitter, Truth, Gab. I use Gab actually quite a bit now. GETTR, although GETTR looks like it's probably falling apart. And then, yeah, so basically everywhere Anna Perez DC except for Instagram. Instagram, I am Wrongthink Anna _. Yeah, and you'll find a lot of my clips on Wrongthink there. So if you like the show, there's also a link to my show in all of my bios as well.
Anna, it was such an honor to have you on the YouTube channel. So we're going to be starting over here on Rumble in about 2 seconds. We'd love to have you guys join us and come with us. Actually, do you got your phone out?
Do I? Yeah.
You want to pull up the live chat? Do you want to say something to these guys? You guys got any questions you guys want to ask Anna before we take off and head over?
Any cues?
Let's see what you got. You guys got any questions for Anna? They're about 30 seconds behind us, so it'll just take them. What up, Mr. K? Ken B, good to see you. Ruba, what up? Hey, what up, what up? I can see your chat there. So how do you like it on, like when you're doing live chats on Rumble, do you pull up your chat on the screen and like communicate with your audience?
So I don't pull it up on the screen. I need to learn how to do that. There's still a lot that I'm learning, honestly, with the software I use. I use OBS. It's a great program. I just don't know all of its capabilities just yet. Or don't know how to use them, I should say. But I do read it like live. And it's because it is an adjustment, like, as you know, probably reading live chats. It's like, it's crazy. It's like, but here's the thing too, like I was thinking about this morning, and I know we're going to move over to Rumble soon, but one of the things that is so interesting is like your average media personality. And I know I kind of already said this in more words, but they're just so much more like journalists today, independent journalists today are so much more capable than like a dinosaur news host. And that's not like an insult. It's just a fact, because you have to know how to do everything. It's just fascinating to me that like I'm in awe of everybody at LFATV and everything that they can do, everything that they're capable of, and the things that they learn. Like if they have an idea, they implement it. Like they actually do it. And that's so rare. Like usually people are like, okay, I need like 3 other people to take care of it for me. But like, no, everybody has this let's work hard attitude. Like it's just truly amazing. And I just feel like it's a different breed of journalists. And I think it's actually a threat to to academia, to the institution of journalism as a whole. I think they don't like that people are capable of doing so much on their own.
I think independent journalists are the biggest threat to the mainstream media. I think it's honestly already dead. So we're going to swing over to Rumble because I want to get into the truth and dive deep into these J6ers. So we appreciate each and every one of you guys. Love you guys. Thank you guys so much for all the likes. Make sure you guys swing over there and show Anna some love. She'd greatly appreciate it. I would, and I'll see you guys on Rumble.